Men stand still, gripping pickaxes and shovels, prepared for action within a brightly lit tunnel beneath the Mexican countryside. They can sense the vibrations of a vehicle passing overhead, and in their caution to avoid any sounds that might reveal their presence, they pause their work as the prison patrol moves above. 30 feet beneath the main yard of the prison, the likelihood of being discovered is minimal. Yet after months of covert tunneling, they cannot afford to take risks, especially now that they are so near their objective, the prison cell of Mexico's most notorious drug lord, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. For months, they have been excavating through solid rock using only pickaxes and shovels, striving to work as swiftly as possible with their limited tools while exercising extreme caution. Progress would be significantly quicker if they could utilize modern tunneling machinery, such as jackhammers and boring machines. However, the noise generated would not only jeopardize their secrecy, but also attract considerable attention to their staging area, located just a mile from the prison's perimeter. Before commencing the tunnel, El Chapo's formidable drug cartel acquired a small parcel of land as close to the prison as feasible and initiated the construction of 2 modest homes to disguise their true intentions. However, the homes never progressed beyond a rough brick exterior, as they were never intended for habitation. Instead, they served as a facade to facilitate the construction of the tunnel that would liberate El Chapo. Yet the tunnel crew was under immense pressure to complete their task as swiftly as possible, given El Chapo's history of prison escapes and evading law enforcement. Mexican authorities could transfer him to another facility at any moment to thwart any potential escape efforts. Each day the tunnelers spent working to reach their leader was another day that could render their efforts futile, necessitating the formulation of a new escape plan in an entirely different location. However, that is not the entirety of the situation. The incomplete structures were starting to attract the attention of local authorities and inquisitive villagers alike. What could prompt someone to initiate construction on a vacant plot of land only to abruptly halt, leaving behind merely the framework of a house? Time was of the essence, and the pressure was escalating. Within his cell, El Chapo exemplified the ideal inmate. In spite of his extensive history of orchestrating some of the most atrocious acts of violence that Mexico has ever witnessed, El Chapo exhibited a courteous and even amiable demeanor towards his prison guards and fellow prisoners. His telephone conversations were meticulously monitored and his correspondence scrutinized by prison officials, yet not a single indication of the ongoing conspiracy was ever disclosed. By this point, El Chapo had become a consummate professional, demonstrating remarkable patience, although that patience was beginning to wane. The tunnel diggers were confronted with a formidable challenge from the outset, fully aware that they needed to act swiftly. Nevertheless, despite the immense pressure they faced, they not only succeeded in reaching El Chapo prior to any possible prison transfer, but also managed to break through to his cell just 16 months into his incarceration. The tunnel they built was highly advanced, impressing officials who would later comment that a tunnel of such scale should have required between 18 months to 2 years for completion. Its walls were reinforced with wooden paneling where necessary, and a generator supplied fresh air through a mile-long ventilation system to ensure the tunnel remained oxygenated. On the ground, the tunnelers had installed rails and utilized a motorcycle to transport 2 carts filled with dirt back and forth along the shaft. Once El Chapo was reached, he would ride that same motorcycle and swiftly cover the mile distance to freedom. However, all that dirt needed a destination, so the tunnelers ingeniously moved it to the tunnel opening, where others would distribute the dirt across the field outside, rather than leaving it in large piles that would undoubtedly attract attention. Nevertheless, the sight of fresh dirt scattered across acres of vacant fields was bound to eventually raise suspicions, leading to inquiries that would be difficult for the fake construction crew above ground to address. Suddenly, in the dead of night on July 12, 2015, the sound of metal scraping echoed from El Chapo's shower inside his cell. Moments later, the ceramic base of the shower came loose, and a familiar face appeared to greet the imprisoned drug lord, inviting him into the darkness below. Without hesitation, El Chapo ducked into the secret tunnel, descending 30 feet into a passage that was only as wide as a man, but just tall enough for him to stand upright. Frequently mocked for his short stature by his adversaries, the tunnel diggers ensured that the tunnel was sufficiently tall so that the boss would not have to stoop as he walked through it. An elegant prison escape, if we ever heard of one. A few feet into the entrance of the tunnel, El Chapo mounted a small motorcycle that had been secured to metal tracks. The carts, laden with dirt that had been pushed for months, were now absent. And just moments after departing from his cell, El Chapo was navigating the well-lit tunnel as if he were a child enjoying an amusement park ride. 2 minutes later, he concluded his joyride by ascending wooden steps and emerging into the vacant shell of a house that his crew had been covertly renovating for a year and a half. After changing into fresh clothes, El Chapo climbed into a truck and was swiftly taken into the darkness of the night, leaving behind an astonishing mile-long secret tunnel and a thoroughly exasperated prison system along with the Mexican government. El Chapo would be apprehended again just months following his escape, after his latest safe house was compromised weeks prior to his arrival by reckless gunmen who were seen by local residents. In response to reports of heavily armed individuals, Mexican officials placed the house under surveillance and intercepted communications indicating that Grandma or Aunt was scheduled to visit. Recognizing this as a potential high-value target, officials bided their time for the right moment to act. 1 month later, Mexican special forces conducted a raid on the residence, resulting in the deaths of several bodyguards. However, El Chapo and one of his top lieutenants managed to escape through, surprise, a secret tunnel. Emerging a mile away from the house, the two commandeered a vehicle at gunpoint, although the driver promptly reported the incident to the authorities. Following the issuance of an alert for the stolen vehicle, federal police officers located the car and apprehended the two fugitives. Nevertheless, El Chapo was determined to attempt to negotiate for his freedom. Recognizing the historical susceptibility of public officials to corruption, El Chapo attempted to bribe the police officers by offering them money, homes, and even high-paying jobs in exchange for his release. However, the desperate kingpin was unaware that he was confronting a new generation of Mexican police officers who were not as easily swayed as those before them. All 4 officers rejected El Chapo's offers, prompting his sweetened proposals to turn sour as he threatened them with death. The officers sent images of El Chapo to their superiors, who informed them that the police had received intelligence indicating that 40 heavily armed assassins were on their way to rescue him. With their backup still engaged at the compound, the officers were instructed to retreat to a nearby motel on the outskirts of town, where they barricaded themselves in an empty room, preparing for a potential life-or-death confrontation. Meanwhile, El Chapo continued to mock them, reiterating his earlier threats. Suddenly, a convoy of vehicles illuminated the road outside, clearly approaching the isolated motel. Armed with M16 assault rifles and pistols, the officers braced themselves for what they anticipated would be their final stand. El Chapo derided them, proclaiming that they were on the brink of death and that their families would follow suit. Nevertheless, the officers remained steadfast, prepared to sacrifice their lives in the line of duty if necessary. However, as the vehicles began to enter the parking lot, El Chapo's jeers were abruptly silenced. Once the brightness of the headlights diminished, the barricaded officers were able to discern military trucks filled with Mexican Marines, swiftly taking up defensive positions around the motel. Moments later, a thoroughly defeated and visibly dejected El Chapo was forcibly placed into an SUV and swiftly taken to an airfield. El Chapo would not manage to escape from a Mexican prison again, and 2 years later, any remaining hope of future escape would be completely extinguished as Mexico approved an extradition request to the United States. Now safely in U.S. custody, El Chapo faces a life sentence in prison. Although he may have been one of the most lethal individuals in Mexico's history, the drug kingpin will ultimately be remembered as nothing more than a weeping figure, pleading with U.S. justice officials for leniency, which they would not provide. If you have made it to the end of this narrative, we recommend checking out our other video, The Most Insane Ways Men Escaped from Prison. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow.